Hello and welcome for joining us today for today's webinar on how to progress to a net zero business through energy. It's so good to see so many of you joining us this morning, and I'd like to welcome you all to our brilliant panel we've got here. This event comes as part of a series of events for our Sustainable Business Series Net Zero campaign, which aims to share best practice, guidance, and knowledge to help businesses progress to net zero. It's delivered in partnership with the Greater Birmingham Chamber of Commerce and the Coventry and Warwickshire Chambers of Commerce as well. I'm Will Hargreaves, Policy Advisor at both of the chambers, and today we're going to hear from our expert panel on progressing to a net zero business through energy. As we all know, the impacts of climate change are always increasing, and in the last few years, climate change and net zero has become a business imperative. We've seen emission reduction targets from the government, we've seen a net zero target to 2050, and now we're seeing even stricter targets for reducing emissions from the economy 78% to 2035. In about a month's time, the UK will host COP26, an international event gathered with 197 countries globally to agree climate action. We can expect further policy movements, potentially legislative changes out of that as the UK sets its goal to become a climate leader. Today, we'll hear perspectives from David Boardman, Head of Strategic Projects of the College of Engineering and Physical Sciences and Deputy Director of the Birmingham Energy Institute. We'll then hear from Lorelei Gurman, a TETA Business Engagement Officer at the Birmingham Energy Institute at the University of Birmingham. Then we'll hear from Bernie McCullough and John Howell, Business Energy Advisors at the Green Business Programme at Coventry Council. And then finally, we'll hear from Tom Redfern, Head of Sustainability at Birmingham Airport. I'd just like to say as well, after the event and just towards the end of this event, we'll be posting a questionnaire in the chat box. Answers to this questionnaire will help us inform future engagement activity around the environmental agenda. Please do fill it out because it helps us provide more accurate support to meet your business needs on net zero and wider environmental trends. It will also help us shape lobbying activity to feed in to central government. So, just before I do that, I'd like to mention that in a few moments, we'll have a short poll of 3 questions, which I'd urge you all to partake in. However, without this webinar, without the sponsorship for this campaign, this webinar would not be free. So therefore, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Aston University, Morgan Sindall, Arup, and of course, the University of Birmingham. We'll host a Q&A at the end of the session, so please do post any questions into the Q&A chat box at the bottom of the screen. Now, I believe we'll have a short poll in a few moments just to go through some questions and really get a sense check of where our audience is at on their net zero journey. So, could we have the poll, please? So as you can see, the Sustainable Business Series poll. So number 1, over the past 12 months, has reducing carbon and/or greenhouse gas emissions become more or less of a priority for your organisation? Number 2, has your organisation implemented any measures to reduce carbon and/or greenhouse gas emissions? And finally, number 3, does your organisation have a plan to achieve net zero? So I'll just wait 15 to 20 seconds whilst we get the results in, and then I'll reflect on the results for the audience. So let's see the results then. So interesting, over the past 12 months, for nearly 80% of the audience, net zero, well, reducing carbon and greenhouse gas emissions has become more of a priority. We've got 5% of less of a priority and 15% no change. So it's great to see that it has become more of a priority. And then over implementing measures over the past few years, we've seen that most are actually choosing to implement measures in the last 12 months. So maybe linked to that increase in priority over the past 12 months as well. And fairly mixed results on the plan to achieve net zero. So we've got 40% yes with a plan, which is so good to see, but 35% still at no, and 25% are still unsure. So thank you all for engaging in that poll. And now I'd like to move on to our first panelist, Dr. David Boardman. David, welcome, and over to you. He'll speak on the regional energy initiatives.
Thanks very much, Will. I'll just share my slides. Okay, hopefully it will go into presentation mode. Right, well, as my computer catches up, first I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. I've been asked to give a presentation around the strategic infrastructure that we're putting in place in the region, and some of the activities we're doing to support both businesses head towards net zero, but also businesses to create opportunity out of the route to net zero. And my slides are just catching up still. I'm hopeful they'll be here in a second. Give it just a couple more seconds. There we go. So as Will introduced me, I'm the Deputy Director of the University of Birmingham's Energy Institute. But equally importantly, it's not about the University of Birmingham. This is about a region coming together. And a few years ago, many of the regional universities, 8 universities and the British Geological Survey put a big bid into government to create a new infrastructure for doing energy innovation with companies. And that was a £180 million piece of investment, 60 million from government, and the companies themselves who wanted to make this happen invested 120 million pounds of their own money. So we have 400 academics across the region, the West Midlands and the Midlands moreover, with 1,000 researchers working on programs of activity to accelerate new products to market, which I think is quite exceptional in the UK landscape. But it's not all about technology, and you have to create that market pull. You have to create the opportunity for the people to pull that technology, that innovation into their businesses. And here are some of the activities, some of the reports that we've produced as a group of universities to help stimulate the opportunities for companies. So there's one here on the left here, securing technology critical metals for Britain. Many of the new products and services that will go into our technologies require these critical materials that are developed, mined in other countries. And it's how do we keep that in our economy? How do we recycle those materials? And another example here is a piece of work that we did around how do we actually decarbonise heat in the UK economy? How do we get to net zero and create a roadmap? And there's some very pithy outcomes of that work that government are listening to on both sides of the house, which will hopefully come to fruition in the comprehensive spending review. Perhaps one of the most important regional pieces of policy work that we helped support with the Energy System Catapult was this powering West Midlands growth and a regional approach to energy innovation. And one of the main outcomes of that piece of work, which was handed to the then Energy Minister at the time, was how we utilise our large investments in our region to develop and design the energy infrastructure differently, so it's fit for purpose for a net zero future. And that's things like, as you develop the Arden Cross site near where HS2 is going, how might you make that a net zero opportunity? And indeed, the image you can see here on the screen is an energy innovation zone at the Tyseley Energy Park. And you'll probably see here in the bottom right, the incinerator, which deals with the city's waste. But this is part of a wider environmental enterprise district that the City of Birmingham are supporting. And here we have a very new biomass to biogas gasification plant, which is providing some low carbon power, which supports this hydrogen production facility. That's the largest hydrogen production facility electrolyser in the UK for mobility solutions, and indeed will power the city's bus fleet, a new hydrogen bus fleet in the city. But this site as an energy innovation zone is more than simply providing new power solutions. It's about creating a hub for innovation, supporting and working with businesses. And with the support of the local enterprise partnership, we've constructed the Birmingham Energy Innovation Centre. It's very simple. You can see here, we've got a hangar on the left and the image of the inside of the hangar is here on the right. And that's where basically companies can work with universities to showcase and demonstrate large-scale pre-commercial demonstrators. And the facilities on the right here, which I won't show you, but that includes one of the most expensive laboratories that we've ever built as a university for working with companies and supporting the development of their innovations. And this is all part of the Tyseley Energy Park. And if you're lucky and you go to the park, you will actually see some of those new buses that are being provided to the city. And there's an aspiration for up to 200 buses. But to do that, we would have to have a significantly larger hydrogen production capability in the city and in the region. So on that note, a couple of the projects that we've been working on with companies, a consortia of companies. On the left here, you will see quite a bit of Chinese writing. One of the challenges nationally is actually how do you decarbonize heat? And this capability with a consortium of companies working with China actually is to take curtailed wind and store it for utilization in either villages or industrial processes. And the irony is it's a British invention. We took it to China in order to scale it up, and now we're bringing it back because we didn't have this capability here in the UK where we could do it. On the right is a piece of work where we've been supporting a consortia of companies to do the very thing that I mentioned earlier on, which is how do we scale up hydrogen production? And one of the potential ways of doing that is what's called ammonia cracking. And ammonia is nitrogen with lots of hydrogen attached to it. And if you strip off that hydrogen, then basically you can produce hydrogen for a significant number of buses. And this project here is a very significant bid that would produce several hundred kilograms of hydrogen per day. This program here is called the Climate Innovation Platform, and it's been very generously sponsored and supported by HSBC as part of a wider international program with the World Wildlife Fund. And what this program, it's a £100 million program worldwide. What the investment here in the West Midlands aims to do is to support incubation of companies and support those companies getting their innovations to market. And so you'll see in the background a series of buildings on the Tyseley Energy Park where the buildings have been refurbished for companies to locate. And the program supports those companies with their innovation. It supports them getting to market. And indeed, for the lucky few, they get to go on to the world stage and get supported into global marketplaces. The sorts of companies we have here supporting at the moment who are just moving in, a company who's invented a rapid car charging process for charging vehicles in 8 minutes, which is quite remarkable given what the current state of the market is. And another company is looking at recycling rare earth materials, which are essential in electric vehicles. And nowhere else in the world can they actually do this. So we've got some really innovative companies coming out of the West Midlands. My colleague Lorelei later will discuss the ATETA program, which is the business support program that's supporting companies behind this. Here's a really exciting initiative that's being driven by our region. It's a bid into the comprehensive spending review to government. You'll know it's very timely. We've got both sides of the house debating how do we decarbonise our homes. And what we have done as a region, we've brought together the stakeholders to suggest how we create a national centre to decarbonise heat in homes. And that's a really big challenge. It's a great business opportunity. How do you retrofit those homes? How do you create the skilled people to actually carry out that piece of work? And if you imagine 20,000 homes a week would need to be retrofitted and converted if we start now. So it's a great opportunity if we can actually get the weight of government investment behind creating a facility here in our region, and it would ideally be based at the Tyseley Energy Park. On another level, you'll see here an image in the middle of the UK's first hydrogen train. So we've been working with a company called Porterbrook, the largest leasing company in the country of trains, and how they actually retrofit their fleet to run on hydrogen. And we've produced the first demonstrator with them, which will actually go to COP26. And who knows, we might even have senior leaders from around the world signing deals in that vehicle, but we'll have to wait and see. Well, this is part of a wider program of actually how do we move goods and people around the country. And we're just starting a program of work that completes in March, which is to create the business case for an investment for hydrogen HGVs from the Midlands right up to the deep ports in Humber. And that will create the business case to government for up to 100 44-ton hydrogen trucks. And in order to do that at the right cost point, at the heart of it, there'll be a need for a leasing company sort of trigger that market pull and the opportunities for companies. Almost done. This is a slight curveball. I thought that you'd find it interesting. We're really very diverse in the region. And what we have here, and you can get a sense of scale, there's a chair, is an international first. This is to support the development of the nuclear industry and the nuclear supply chain in the UK. And it's based in this region. It's a neutron source with the same power capability of neutrons for a nuclear reactor. And that means we can irradiate materials for fusion and fission, supporting those supply chain companies develop new products for that industry as it emerges. Finally, the campus, the university itself is looking to go on a journey to net zero. How do we create the most intelligent network for power and gas and heat on our campus? Remember, it's a small town. There are several thousand people who basically live and work on the campus. And we want to see how we can utilize our campus as a living laboratory with spillover benefits to the local community as we go on our journey to net zero. And to achieve that, we've just gone into a collaboration with Siemens. And the ambition, the target, the aim is to be the smartest net zero campus in the world. And that is the target that we're aiming for over the next decade. So lots of exciting things being driven by our region. I thought you'd find it interesting to see quite a breadth of activity. And I will end right there, Will. Hopefully that's just on time.
Thank you, David, and certainly an eye-opening presentation there on some of the groundbreaking technologies from businesses that you're facilitating at that area, particularly, you know, reflecting on the charging the car within 8 minutes. I'm sure that's, you know, good to hear to a lot of people that, you know, maybe in 5 years' time that could be widely commercially available and really help us drive those reductions as there's the phase out of internal combustion engines by 2030 and then 2035 for vans. So thank you very much for the presentation. And as he discussed, now we'll go on to Lorelei Gurman, who is the Business Engagement Officer at Ateta. So yeah, Lorelei, over to you. And yeah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just waiting for the slides to come up. Perfect. Good morning. I'm Lorelei, and I work as a Business Engagement Officer on the Ateta project at the University of Birmingham. Next slide, please. Next, okay, thank you. Ateta is an SME support program. We're based in the Birmingham Energy Institute, for which our colleague, Dr. David Borman, is the Deputy Director. We are funded by the European Regional Development Fund, which means that the support we offer companies is free to businesses and charities, so it comes out of state aid. What we do is offer free support in the adoption of low carbon, sustainability, and energy efficiency technologies. As we're trying to help industry to decarbonize, we're trying to help companies achieve UK net zero. We can offer support to businesses or charities across the West Midlands, so GBLS LEP area, but also Black Country, Coventry and Warwickshire, Worcestershire. And since 2017, we have supported more than 170 businesses. So how does our program work? Next slide, please. We offer low carbon and energy expertise to our team of 9 experienced research engineers and their academic supervisors. So that is essentially 9 mini academic teams. We're a big group. And we have all worked on industrial projects, and the academics will work with you in order to identify ways for you to improve energy efficiency, identify new market prospects, test and demonstrate new ideas or new products, help you grow your business essentially. So we can offer technical support across mechanical, chemical, and electronics engineering. To date, our program has succeeded in generating a net income of almost £25 million for the local economy. And some of the key project areas, so the focus areas for our program, are around providing technical, innovative solutions for companies around thermal energy, mobility, electricity, electrical support, and even mechanical engineering design. So on next slide, please. I'm going to give you a few examples of different technical solutions to highlight what kind of technologies we have supported in the past. A core skill we have on our team is offering thermal solutions for companies. Ateta, the acronym stands for Accelerating Thermal Energy Technology Adoption. So thermal solutions basically means looking at energy obtained from either cooling or heating technologies. So a number of companies will have cooling, for example, refrigeration, freezing, or air conditioning even. Likewise, many companies manufacturing, food and drink manufacturing, heating companies will look at generating heat from power. So we can investigate how we can capture the energy from low, medium, and high temperatures, for example, from boiling water, so 60 degrees water in some industrial processes, or any boiling process, any metal melting process. So for example, temperatures over 600 degrees in furnaces, or gas-fueled heaters for rooms. So we can look at capturing energy either from the cooling or the heating processes in your operations. And basically, energy capture and storage are some of the core skills we offer, looking at capturing either the natural waste heat or cooling through materials. For example, using water or phase-changing materials to store some of the energy from cooling and heating, storing it either in short-term duration, such as batteries, or long-term, such as fuel cells or microgrids, storing it and then utilizing it. And we can utilize it either when it is needed during another cycle of the same process. For example, when you melt metal, or in cyclic processes, or you can use the same energy stored in another part of your company, for example, in an adjoining bay, or to heat up water that's used in another industrial process. So we are looking a lot at how can we capture, store, and then utilize the energy from your own processes. Of course, a big part of it is thermal energy analysis. So looking at the thermal transfer of energy to the environment. For example, when you're boiling water, a lot of energy is lost to the environment. So we would call that natural waste heat. And we can understand how to better utilize that energy. For example, we can keep water at a high temperature for a longer time using better insulation. We apply the same principle for better refrigerators, or we can apply a number of thermal insulating solutions to anywhere where your process might benefit from it. And that is essentially a retrofitting solution. So it doesn't mean that you need to, for example, capture, to get new equipment to achieve this decarbonization. By retaining heat during operations, or any type of energy, you essentially need less power input. So, for example, in cyclic processes, if you're recovering some of the energy and then you're releasing in the second stage of the process, for example, when you need to keep on heating water, for example, during brewing, you essentially need less power input. So every time you're using some of the stored energy, you need less power input, you minimize your energy bills, and essentially you're decarbonizing your enterprise as well. And an interesting topic is combined heat and power. So sometimes when you're generating electricity, when you're trying to capture energy from the process, you actually generate heat. So you have both electricity and heat, combined heat and power, and you can look at how do you use that heat in your own enterprise. So it's a lot of exciting, innovative technologies which academia is looking at implementing in industries. A second, next slide, please. A second type of project we could do is around electronics. So there are a number of electronics applications across many industries and many companies. So basically, we're looking at using electronics monitoring equipment for an adequate operational assessment and to design better, more efficient systems. So essentially, you can use electronics to look at the digitalization of a manufacturing process, or at renewable energies. Essentially, anywhere where you need some electronics design to make for a more efficient process, we can help. Another example is that in farming companies such as aquaponics or hydroponics, you can have a very good monitoring and control electronic system to improve the energy storage. Likewise, in renewable energies, there are a number of companies that sell solar PVs or wind turbines, but how do you capture that energy? How do you store it? How do you utilize it are the main questions. So our team has dedicated distributed energy system design and grid integration skills. So we can look at how to capture, store, and utilize energy from renewables, looking at long-term storage of energy from solar power, for example, which can be applied to any company that's looking to decarbonize to increase their sustainability. And a third key project focus area is around fuel. So we can look at generating energy from waste, for example, bio-waste, which my colleague David Borman mentioned earlier. So anywhere where you have a bio-waste, for example, from a brewing process, you have a number of different products, byproducts such as spent grain, which is sometimes used as feedstock for cattle or any other farm animal. You don't need to only use it as feedstock in a circular economy, but actually, if you have enough bio-waste, you can look at generating energy yourself through generating these byproducts. So through burning, through pyrolysis, through electrolyzer, you can contribute to becoming a source for ammonia and hydrogen generation. So essentially, ammonia and hydrogen are carbon negative fuels. They're not just carbon neutral, they're carbon negative. So if you have any type of gas fueled heater, such as a boiler or a furnace, and there's a big demand on the market for this, you can look at decarbonizing that process by blending some of your natural gas fuel with ammonia and hydrogen. So you can generate energy from waste, and then you can become a source for hydrogen and ammonia yourself, which are in high demand on the market, and they're carbon negative. Essentially, they don't only make for carbon neutral operation, they can help you decarbonize your entire enterprise because they help you carbon offset a big quantity of the carbon your company can generate. So these are just some of the types of the support we can offer. And I've included a few case studies. Basically, we have, because we have 9 academic teams, we can offer support to businesses between 2 to 9 days of support funded activity. And it can be anything from modeling and simulation for electronics, chemical or mechanical engineering. We can do material testing. We can do product development for green products, for example, e-bikes. We can do systems engineering design, lab work and analysis. We have also done carbon footprint analysis for a number of green products, looking at how much they're helping us reduce emissions. We can help with commercialization and innovation support, for example, market assessment or technical economic analysis, such as the fast charging EV battery that David Borman mentioned earlier, that is based at Tesla Energy Park. And something we can also do is scope out funding available in the area. Not only can we help with a short-term, let's say, a TETA technical support project, but we can also enable you to develop more low carbon and sustainability innovation by entering into a long-term collaboration with our academic colleagues. So by scoping out funding available for a certain area, we can help you develop a longer-term feasibility study and then potentially a demonstrator that is bespoke for your company. Next slide, please. And one such case study is our project on waste heat recovery, particularly with metal forming companies in the Black Country. Since last year, we have been collaborating with the Confederation for British Metal Forming, and we have supported them with an TETA feasibility study. And also we have applied for joint funding for the GBLS Lab Low Carbon and Circular Economy Grant Fund. This enables us to expand the feasibility study around waste heat recovery from extremely high intensity, high energy consumption processes such as casting, forging processes, at how can we capture that energy, how can we store it, and how can we utilize it again in the same process, essentially looking to minimize the energy bills and the carbon consumption within the companies. We have worked with 2 CBM members and with the CBM, and we're currently looking at applying for further funding in developing a demonstrator and a large-scale implementation for the 31 members of the CBM. Next slide, please. So in addition to give you a bit more of an overview, from an independent evaluation carried out at the end of phase 1 of TETA 2017-2020, it was established that £8 million per year of gross value added was generated from our program. The net economic impact was of £6.10 for every £1 spent. And from feedback, 90% of businesses reported a positive impact on their company, with 64 of SMEs introducing a new product or process after our support project, and 50% entering into long-term collaborations with the university. Next slide. So on TETA, we have a number of different types of project assists, which can help your business. We can help you develop low carbon solutions to make more energy efficient processes and help industry decarbonize. Do get in touch with our team to adopt some of the solutions, and we can help you reach UK net zero. So thank you very much, and I hope I'm on time.
Thank you, Lorelei. It was certainly an eye-opening presentation there, and I think it's very topical at the moment with the increased prices of energy, and it just highlights the importance of actually looking at where you can save and recycle energy, including heat, within the business, especially if you're looking at, you know, tens and thousands of kilowatt hours in the more high energy intensive industries. So very interesting. And, you know, it also draws on some principles of circular economy, and we are hosting a similar webinar on the circular economy next week on the 14th, so Wednesday the 14th, I believe. So please do, if there are any businesses here that are interested in finding out more about the circular economy and how it can apply to your business, please do register for that event. So next, I believe we'll hear from John Howell and Bernie McCullough, who are from the Green Business Energy Project at the Coventry City Council. So we'll hear about energy auditing and management for businesses. Over to you, John and Bernie.
Thanks, Will. Morning, everybody. Just sharing my screen now. Can everyone see that? Brilliant. Okay, so John and I are doing a double act today. We're business energy advisors with Coventry City Council. I'm going to hand over to John in a second to talk about the Green Business Programme that we work on, which is Coventry, Warwickshire specific, but we will touch on other support schemes that are similar in the region. So over to you, John.
Lovely, thank you, Bernie, and thanks, Will, for handing over, and thanks to the speakers so far. That was all really interesting. So I want to give you a bit of an overview of the programme, show what we do, and obviously, most importantly, show where we can help you guys out there. So as Bernie has said, we obviously cover the Coventry and Warwickshire area. We were established in 2016. Now, there are other similar schemes out there that do similar things, in particular the low carbon SME scheme for the Birmingham area. But obviously, we're going to just talk about what our scheme does today. Now, as you'd expect with any ERDF European funded programme, there are a lot of criteria that need to be met before we can support you. So we have some basic SME eligibility criteria, which are essentially your business needs to have less than 250 employees. Your turnover needs to be less than 50 million euros a year. You need to have received less than 20,000 or 200,000 euros in public aid over the last 3 years. And as a rule, you need to have 50% of your sales through business to business channels. So if those initial criteria are met, then we can obviously look to support you. Next slide, please, Bernie.
Sorry, I'm trying to move it on, it's not moving. Just bear with me a second. Let me just stop sharing and share again, see if that helps. Okay, this is typical. I do think it was going to go wrong. Sorry, just bear with me.
No worries.
Okay, we're back.
Wow, well done.
There we go. Phew.
Okay, thanks, Bernie. So just to quickly run through the main aims of our scheme. Primarily, we're about helping businesses reduce carbon. That's our main driver. That's the thing we're targeted on. So obviously, the logic goes, if we can help people reduce their carbon outputs, we're helping them reduce their emissions, and by default, we can help them reduce their costs. So carbon's our main driver, basically. We also provide access to grant funding, which will help businesses implement energy efficiency measures. So we'll give money towards any of those improvement measures, which we'll explain in a bit more detail later on. But we're also a bit of an advice shop. We're there to provide advice and guidance for businesses that want help in, just general energy efficiency measures and so on. We tend to speak to lots of companies during the course of the week. And whether we do an audit, whether we do any help or not, we're there to provide some sort of assistance. So as a rule, we have two sort of main facets to our programme. The first thing we always do is an energy audit, which we do free of charge. Normally that's worth £840. And it's important to say that that audit is actually, it's totally impartial. There's no agenda, there's no bias. So you'll just get some good, honest advice for your business from the energy audit. And from that, we then look to apply grant funding. We have a grant funding available between £1,000 and £50,000, and that is there to give you up to 40% towards your capital project. The key thing to mention here is that we have some rules around how much funding we can give, and we must demonstrate that we can save you at least a ton of CO2 per £1,000 of grant given, just to make it work out well. Thank you, Bernie. Highlights for the programme so far. So far in phase 2 of our project, which has run since 2019, we have assisted over 140 businesses, collectively saving just under 1,800 tonnes of CO2. That equates to us providing over £1.5 million in grant funding to support the efficiency measures. In our pot so far, up until the end of the programme in 2023, we've got just over £700,000 of money left to allocate. If we allocated all that funding, which we will by the end of 2023, we will have saved over 3,000 tonnes of CO2 moving forward. And just to give you a bit of a, it's difficult to find an exact comparison, but just to give you a comparison for a tonne of CO2, it's basically equivalent to the emissions produced by a standard car in a 6-month period. Thanks, Bernie. So the program itself, straightforward, he says. Businesses provide us with 12 months energy bills, first of all, be it electricity, gas, oil, LPG, on-grid or off-grid, whatever they use. And that lets us produce a baseline of the energy use. Myself or Bernie would then go out to site. We'd spend some time with the business owner. We'd do a good walk round, and we're looking for those energy and inputs on site and those processes that are using energy. We would take pictures. We like a nice cup of tea and a biscuit while we're there, just to drop that in. But generally, we're about getting a feel for how your business works and how we can help, basically. And from that, we'll then submit a full report for you with the following objectives. So primarily, the report will break down your business energy use, your costs, and your carbon outputs for each process individually. And that helps us sort of identify areas where there's the highest inefficiencies on site. And we then provide a bespoke improvement measures for each area of the business. And from that, we then extrapolate what grant funding we can give you, basically, to help put in those measures, which again, we'll explain a little bit further on. Okay, now just pivoting away from the scheme slightly, I thought it important to drop in a bit of feedback in what we're seeing out there in the field, because obviously myself and Bernie, we're out there talking to local businesses, we're talking to them on the phone, we're meeting them face to face, and we're kind of finding that most businesses, well, SMEs that we deal with, they're coming out of COVID. They've had a tough time, as we all know, and most businesses are now looking to the future. So they're looking at how they, I don't want to drop in Build Back Better, because that's Boris's slogan, but we're looking at how we can build to the future and plan the next couple of years. But the overriding concern that we're seeing, especially with the news the last week or two, is a concern over rising energy costs. But while the main driver behind the scheme is cost savings, I and Bernie in particular are seeing more traction due to the green agenda. We're seeing more companies wanting to become more green, to improve their company image, and also trying to win more bids and more tenders by having a more ethical approach. So things are getting a bit greener from what we're seeing out there on the road on a day-to-day basis. Thanks, Bernie.
I'm so sorry, it's happening again. I can't move it on, just bear with me. I'll stop sharing and share again.
We need some hold music, that's what we need.
We knew there'd be a technical hitch of some description. Right, are we back?
We're back. So I think we were on to, yeah. That was it. Thank you, Bernie. So again, we are seeing an increase in awareness of the green agenda. Obviously, we're hoping that's driven by COP26 that's coming up. So while operating cost reductions are the main driver for what we do, we're happily, especially for me and Bernie, we're seeing an awareness of the wider issue. So we're hopefully seeing an awareness of the national and the global issue that's facing us all. And we're also seeing more inbound queries to our scheme with people looking for funding for more renewable technologies such as solar PV and air source heat pumps. So overall, that's hopefully a trend that will increase over time. So within the scheme, we recommended a number of efficiency recommendations. We've listed some of the main ones here. The top two we tend to recommend are insulation and LED lighting. They are the two that can provide the quickest savings at the lowest capital outlay. We also look at heating, obviously improving your boiler with a new, more efficient boiler, or air source heat pumps, or those kind of technologies. Double glazing is self-explanatory. We also look at shutter doors, automatic shutter doors, to reduce the heat loss from buildings. Solar PV is a big one we look at, and heat pumps we've mentioned, and also HVAC. So they're the things that we do. And my colleague Bernie will now sort of expand on those in a bit more detail and give you some nice case studies explaining things in a bit more detail. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So we thought we'd focus on 3 case studies. PV, as we've mentioned before, in terms of we get queries about renewables. Lighting, as John referred to, has got a huge carbon saving for relatively low cost, and heat pumps because we're seeing increasing interest in that subject. So the PV case study we've chosen is a machinery manufacturer. This is a large grant which had to go to our grants panel for approval, and it was a company that just looked at PV and not other measures, which is something we wouldn't normally want to support. We'd like to try and do a holistic approach to the building. However, in this case, it was a relatively new build. We'd already got a lot of energy efficiency measures in place already, so PV was one of the main things I had left to do. So we capped the grant because it was only one measure to look at in terms of the carbon saving, but even with a big solar PV array, had just over 2.5-year payback, 7 tons of carbon saved. What we thought was interesting is that there's other benefits to doing these things apart from cost saving. So you've got your marketing element in terms of it's a very visual impact about your energy efficiency approach. You're protecting yourself against future rising energy prices we've referred to before. And also you can link it to battery storage and use it to power other items in the future as well. So in terms of lighting, these are the sorts of things we look at. So things like metal halide fittings have got a huge carbon saving to change to LED. Most businesses we speak to are pretty much all on manual switches, very few sensors. That's something we'll look at again as another low cost measure, but decent carbon saving. And we'll also look at things like maximising natural daylight into the building. So things like getting your skylights cleaned or replaced, things like that you might not think about, but can make a big energy saving difference. So the lighting case study we've used is an engineering company. They had a £4,000 project cost, just over 1.5k grant. And with the grant, that meant that they had just under a year payback period, which makes that a no-brainer to do. And 4 tons of carbon saved, which just shows the proportion in terms of lighting compared to a more expensive measure that you can have a decent carbon saving for a much lower cost. And again, the additional benefits to that was this particular business found that the quality of light improved for doing close-up work inspection for their work. It's not just about cost savings. So we look at heating, cooling and insulation. We'll look at old gas and oil burners, but even things like you might not think about electric portable heaters under people's desks in offices. We'll look at all of that. We'll assess your whole heating approach and cooling. Insulation. One thing we thought was worth mentioning as a sort of relatively lower cost measure, infrared heaters we quite often recommend for companies who've got a big warehouse or big factory space, so they've got a huge old industrial heating system heating the whole space, but actually by putting in focused targeted heating to areas where you might have different activity levels, so people can feel warmer or hotter depending on what their job role is. And having that focus to where they are means that the heating's left on for less time, the individual's more comfortable, and it's using much less energy, it's more controllable rather than having one big inefficient heating system heating the whole space. But because we get queries about air source heat pumps, we thought we'd focus on this as a case study. This was a massive system that was put in. That was the project cost and the grant. But that meant that it would turn down to an 8-year payback with the grant. And that was 2 big oil burners that got replaced with air source. Huge carbon saving of 13 tons. But in addition to that, again, the extra benefit is removing the fuel storage on site, so you haven't got big oil tanks. So in terms of health and safety and other sort of quality accreditations and stuff, it's good not to have that stored on site. So that was our case studies. The other thing we offer is our Green Business Network, which is free membership. It's got a wide range of benefits as there. One key one being our monthly e-newsletter. So you've got current information coming out, including funding and events and things like that. but also the main one is our Green Business Directory. So in terms of networking and supply chain opportunities, either to showcase your own business or in terms of procurement, if you're trying to get hold of businesses, it's a great resource to use and network. The last section we're going to talk about is around energy management, where to start in terms of if you're looking at your own energy and you want to do it yourself. So the Carbon Trust estimate that even by doing low and no cost actions such as, turning your lights off, getting your timers right, things like that, you can reduce your energy cost by 10%. So it really is important to not ignore your energy use and just pay the bill. The key ones are measuring your baseline. So what do you normally use outside of COVID, where you might have been having office closures and things like that? Checking your bills is silly things, but I've worked with businesses where they've had different VAT rates on different bills, different tariff rates for different buildings with the same supplier, or with different meters on different tariff rates with the same building. And things like capacity charges for electricity. If you've got a particular agreement set up with your energy supplier and you're going over that, you're being overcharged, it's worth just reviewing that and making sure it fits with your current business usage. If you've got building management systems or smart meters, use that information. You probably can't see it very well, but that graph on the right is just a smart meter data that you can download and have a look at and see any energy wastage over like weekends or bank holidays or when the business is closed. So you can identify where the wastage is and then take action to reduce or replace items as needed. Another few tips are taking regular meter readings. It's really obvious, but if you do that at home, you should be doing that for your business as well, particularly obviously if you've got no smart meters. We often see estimated bills coming in, businesses being overcharged. We've mentioned the other two items. And then switching. So if you've got an energy broker, use them. If not, there's a wealth of information out there in terms of Ofgem and CAB on business energy advice switching. But the slides are going to come out after this, so you'll be able to see those links there. But overall, why do it yourself? Because we're here. It's a free energy advice resource. We can do the energy audits, we can access the funding, we've got the expertise, so get in touch with us. There's a Coventry and Warwickshire details there for us if that's relevant to your area. There's also a very similar scheme in the Black Country in Birmingham, so get in touch with those if that's more relevant to your area. And then one very, very last thing, just to point out that it's not just about green business funding. There are lots of other funding resources and business advice support packages out there. And the best sort of one point of call in terms of being the fount of all knowledge is going to your local growth hub, because they'll be able to signpost you to the relevant funding or business advice support packages that are out there. So that was it from us. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Bernie and John. A very insightful presentation there, touching on a range of different practical measures that businesses can use to reduce their energy consumption and emissions. And it's interesting how simple some of the measures are, but how high some of the savings are as well. So I would really urge any businesses in the Coventry and Warwickshire area to get involved in this initiative. It really is good, and they will do the legwork for you to help you save costs and emissions within your business. And then similarly for those in the greater Birmingham and Solihull area, there's that low carbon SME program from Aston University as well. So please do check that out. We'll circulate the slides afterwards. And just a reminder as well for our delegates today, please do put any questions in the chat. We do have a brilliant panel of expert speakers here, so it'd be a shame to waste their knowledge today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our final speaker today, who will be speaking on Birmingham Airport's carbon reduction and energy reduction story. So over to you, Tom Redfern, Head of Sustainability at Birmingham Airport.
Thanks, Will, and thanks to the Chamber for inviting us to speak today. So hopefully I'll just get my screen sharing. Right, that should be working now. So yes, I'm Tom Redfern, I'm Head of Sustainability at Birmingham Airport. I've been at the airport for 8 years now in various roles, but always within the sustainability team, and more recently, much more focused on the net zero agenda. So really just a quick overview of what we're going to look at. I want to give a bit of an update on our current position. So where are we now? Where are we in terms of net zero and energy reduction? It'd be hard, especially being in the airport, then not to do a little bit about the pandemic and the impact that's had upon us and what we've done about energy reduction during that time and energy management. It really was an opportunity to really completely relook at how we do things. And we've learned a lot during that time. And then finally, our journey to net zero now and where are we going with that? So first up to say kind of our position. I'm not going to spend too long on this slide, but just as a bit of a background to kind of Birmingham Airport and its position within the UK. We're the 7th largest airport in the UK, the 3rd largest outside of London. We're really well placed on the road and rail network. The rail network is obviously a particular advantage to us when we start to look at our scope 3 emissions, which is a bit outside the scope of what we're looking at today. We've got one runway, and pre-pandemic, we had in 2019 just under 13 million passengers. And over the last 10 years, we've had £225 million of investment. And there's a master plan which is still valid today, albeit likely to be slightly delayed as a result of the pandemic, to grow out to 18 million passengers with a further £500 million of investment. Now, of course, as part of all of this, net zero and carbon reduction is a really vital and key part. So with that in mind, in late 2019, we published our sustainability strategy. And within that strategy, there was a commitment to being a net zero carbon airport by 2033, prioritising zero carbon airport operations and minimising carbon offsets. So it was really important to us that when we started this journey, that we were really going to drive down the emissions generated by the airport and really use carbon offsets as a last resort. It kind of almost goes without saying that whilst we're really focused on scope 1 and 2 emissions, we're ever mindful of the fact that our scope 3 emissions are a big portion of what happens here at the airport. So obviously we have airlines that operate here, we have a lot of third parties on site, we have passenger travel to and from the site. So whilst that's not directly included within our net zero target, where we're focused on scope 1 and 2 emissions, we are continuing to work with our online partners, and we know there's a lot of exciting innovation coming down the line, particularly regarding aircraft, and we're pretty sure that by the 2030s, we're going to be seeing electric aircraft, certainly hybrid aircraft and hydrogen aircraft. So we're really starting to think about what do we need to do with our infrastructure to support this, not least in terms of electricity provision, provide that energy. Focusing on those scope 1 and 2 emissions, I've just kind of provided a bit of a breakdown. So this was going up to financial year 2018-19, kind of not going to spend too much time looking at the pandemic years in this part, because clearly that's had a disproportionate impact on our emissions. You'll see that the biggest chunk of our emissions, nearly 70%, is from our electricity usage, followed by gas at around 25%. And then a few other little bits, including fleet fuel and diesel usage. Hopefully you can see a little bit of detail in that table, but as the electricity, particularly year on year, our CO2 impact has reduced, and that's through a combination of both things that we have done on site, but everybody is seeing a benefit in terms of the greening of the grid and a natural kind of reduction in their CO2 impact. So a little bit of what we've done up to now. So there's a few photos there. Firstly, one on the left is a picture of our electric buses. So back in a couple of years ago now, we introduced our electric buses, and they serve all of our landside car parks. So all of the diesel buses have gone from there, and they have an equivalent of 70% less emissions compared to the diesel buses that they replace. And of course, not just the carbon impact, but there's also a benefit to curbside emissions, where there is no curbside emissions as a result of the electric buses. We've also got a power logic system. So that's in the top right there, you see the little login screen. And this basically is the front end to a massive sub-metering system that we've got. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the slides. We also did back in 2012, you can see in the bottom right, the initial kind of tentative steps, if you like, into some solar PV. So there's 212 panels there, which actually generates less than 1% of our electricity on site. But it kind of proved the concept to us that it does work, and we now know for certain it absolutely does work. And we'll come on to that again a little bit as we go on through, and we see solar PV as a massive opportunity for us at the airport. So as I said, unfortunately, especially working within the aviation sector, couldn't really do this presentation without a little bit of a look at the pandemic and the impact that's had upon us, but also the opportunities that's presented. So again, I'm not going to spend too long on this slide, but as many of you will know, the aviation sector was one of those worst affected by the pandemic. The airport remained open, however, we were committed to remaining open to serve those passengers which did need the airport, along with cargo and emergency and medical flights, including things like PPE, which, remember, right back at the pandemic was in short supply. What that did mean, though, was that overall our passenger volumes were down 92% when compared to the previous year. And during all this, though, we've supported some more of the national effort, which includes setting up a testing centre, and along with Heathrow, we were a red list airport, accepting flights direct from red list countries, using a managed part of the terminal to keep all those passengers segregated before going to hotels. And also, more importantly for this, we've taken steps to manage all our costs, and that includes energy. Now, just a couple of photos there hopefully gives some kind of idea of the scale of the impact. So that's our terminal at 7:30 at night, which would usually be packed with passengers going on holiday. And as you can see, it's not a soul in sight. And that's our departures board, which usually has 2 or 3 hours worth of flights on it. There's about 5 days worth of flights on there. So just a bit of a kind of an overview really of the scale of that impact. The impact also, perhaps unsurprisingly, had a big impact upon our energy demand, and particularly electricity, which is what we're kind of really focusing on today. And that dotted red line pretty much shows the start of the pandemic and how we kind of quickly looked to shut everything down. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we did that in the coming slides and what that meant. And we're now working hard as we reopen, almost fully reopen, to not go back to how we were before. So looking at what can we do to keep that energy demand lower than where we were pre-pandemic. So what does this mean? So it was a 26% emissions reduction in terms of electricity, and it saved the airport over £2 million during the pandemic. So a really significant saving. And when we look at how we did this, it was through a combination of measures. So firstly, it was using that sub-metering data. So the slide earlier on, which showed the login, we used that sub-metering data to really start to provide us with some of the information that we needed to look at where those areas that were using most energy were and what could we do in those areas. It's very difficult to do anything about data, as we quickly found, and the sub-metering is still an area where we really now know that we need to improve. So we were struggling to identify areas which were using most energy, and that might sound crazy, but without that data coming through, we just didn't know. So we've now identified a lot of areas where we want to improve that sub-metering network to give us more granularity in the data. We also did 5 site-wide energy audits, which generated 123 actions, from light to shutting down whole sections of the terminal. Those audits always included executive team member attendance, and it was a really eye-opening experience in terms of our infrastructure, which has been added to over the years. And as I say there, what might sound simple, like turning, we quickly realised that we simply didn't know how to turn some of the lights off because we're 24/7 operation and we've never tried to turn that light off. And then when we did turn the light off, it turned something else off 10, 20 meters away, which needed to leave on. It's kind of really educated us in terms of how do we do things, and thinking now to the future as we start to develop, to make sure that those things are in place, and we think about that when we develop, to make sure we maintain the autonomy and control over everything that we're building. We also set up an operational production continues to meet bi-weekly with senior management, and at that group we present all of the energy data from the previous 2 weeks, and we break that down by different areas, and we also look back over time and compare that, and we're looking for anomalies, looking for increases, and then trying to work out why that is and what we might be able to do about it. As I said, we had 123 actions, and basically that meant turning off a lot of stuff. And as we got busier, we were really conscious there was a big operational drive just to turn everything back on. So we set up a process whereby anything needed to be switched back on had to be authorised, and proper justification had to be given for why that was essential and why that was needed. And as I've already said, kind of linking back into those audits is a detailed insight into how different assets interact with one another. So our journey to net zero, and I'm conscious of time, Will, so I'll keep it moving. So in terms of our journey to net zero, it's fair to say we're still in our early stages. As I said, we made our commitment back in late 2019. Little did we know that a global pandemic was on the way and all of the challenges that's brought. So we really see ourselves as being 18 months behind where we wanted to be. Notwithstanding that, in summer this year, we commissioned some consultants to come on site, and we asked them to really look at two key areas for us. Firstly, what's the potential for our on-site energy generation, and then what's our options available for asset replacement. So if we take the options for on-site energy generation first, we really see two key areas. One is solar PV, which we think is a really good option. We can do a lot of that on site within our terminal, within the airport boundary, the fence line, if you like, either on our roof spaces, or on some of those grassy areas. There's a lot of challenges to go with that being an operational airport, but we feel that they're all kind of overcome. We can overcome all of those, and we just need to do a bit more of a detailed feasibility study into that. We also looked at wind turbines. It's highly unlikely we'd be able to make that a viable option on the airport site for a range of reasons: radar interference, weight turbulence generated from it going across the airfield, and the issues that cause for aircraft. But also, although it might sound a bit counterintuitive to an airport, we've also got a lot of residential properties around us, and wind turbines do generate noise. So a turbine on scale that we need to make it airport is probably quite unlikely at the airport site. We just skip on to asset replacements. So much of the infrastructure here is aging, and as we've already said, it's been added to over the years. So we've added new bits of terminal, new bits of car parking, you name it, over the years, we've added bits on, and that brings with it both many opportunities, but also challenges. I've tried to kind of pick out some of the key ones really along the way. So firstly, many of the assets are coming towards the end of their life and ready for replacement. That's a great opportunity for us now to relook at what we've got and how can we do it differently. There's also an opportunity to have a complete rethink about the heating and cooling and how that's provided across the airport. We have a number of almost independent heating and cooling systems which don't interact with each other. And we now think that this is a good opportunity to bring those together into a district scheme and really look at how we do that. And there's other benefits, operational benefits that can bring as well, including freeing up terminal space, which obviously has a value for potential concessions or other airport operational uses. We're also in a position now to start exploring new technologies that weren't previously viable, and a further rollout of LED. So just to kind of expand on the LED point, over the years, we've done a lot of LED lighting, and I think it's probably just a small note of caution really, and something that we've learned is that we've always done what we felt was the right thing, and we'd go and replace an old light fitting with a new LED light fitting. But what that's actually left in this position of is a couple of things. One, open honestly, we don't actually know whether it's LED and isn't LED, so we now need to go out and survey that to find out what's left. And secondly, LED lighting typically is much brighter than the lighting it replaces. So we now have areas which are actually very overlit, and if we took a step back and done a more kind of holistic view, we could have designed that area better and actually reduce the amount of lighting that we were replacing. Nevertheless, we still see an opportunity there, and particularly also out on the airfield where we have a lot of high-powered lighting. In terms of challenges, what we see is our building fabric. It's interesting that some of the speakers have kind of touched on insulation, includes many of the technologies, particularly around heating. Essentially, our infrastructure is aging and it isn't most efficient. So we need to provide a real high heat to keep it heated. And that's something that we're struggling with, particularly when we look at kind of air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps. they just can't provide enough heat to heat the building. So we're really looking hard at what's going to replace gas, and we see that as a real challenge. Funding for projects need to be carefully considered, along with return on investment and deliverability, a challenge that many people will be facing and something we're kind of getting a head around at the moment. And then, as I say, gas, which is particularly difficult to replace. So what next for us? Firstly, we want to better understand or further develop, I should say, really our metering network. We want to put more sub-meters in. We want to get better granularity of data. Without the data, you just don't know where to focus your efforts. It's just so important. We're going to continue to develop the viability of sites for on-site energy generation and essentially create a list of what's going to give us the best bang for our buck, if you like, and then work backwards down from that, and we'll develop that and create a rolling program. We're going to better understand the heating and cooling loss across the site and really identify those areas where we're seeing the biggest heat loss or heat gain. We have a lot of areas with a lot of glass, and we see a lot of solar gain in the summer months, and look at what we might be able to do to address those areas first. Was developing a coordinated plan for replacement of assets, as well as LED lighting and opportunities where we can go further. All of this is kind of being rolled up into our net zero strategy, which, kind of going back to the pandemic point, which I really don't want to labour, we'd hoped to have done 12 months ago now. We're currently working on this, and this is all going to form part of that strategy. So I hope I haven't gone over too much. Like I say, I'm conscious of time, but that's everything from me, Will, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, and it's great to see the CO2 impact being reduced on site. And I think, it is really key that you measure the data and then consistently, assess that, on a timed basis. And you've clearly got a lot of actions there, 123, which is quite a lot. So you've got a big list to go through there. And I guess, going back to the data point, it touches on that age-old adage, doesn't it? You can't manage what you don't measure. So that's certainly one to note for the audience. So we'll go on to a Q&A now. We'll aim to end about 11:20. So we'll have 10-12 minutes of Q&A. And I have seen there have been quite a few questions coming through the chat box today. So thank you all for engaging with this webinar and our speakers. But I'd just like to kick things off really with a more broad question. And, we do have, different sectors. And I was just wondering, for the expert panel, are you seeing any differences in, I guess, what the opportunities are and challenges are between the manufacturing and services sector? I don't know if someone would like to come in and kick us off with that.
I can do, if you like. It depends on the building and the setup, but with manufacturing, they've often got quite specialist equipment, so quite old, inefficient machinery, for instance, where it could be air compressors or CNC machines or whatever. So they've got kind of more specialist equipment that we can focus on and try and find them some savings. But with us, the challenge from that end is that sometimes the carbon savings aren't sufficient to meet our carbon ratio to funding. So that's the key difference, I would think, anyway.
Excellent. I don't know if anyone else would like to come in and add to Bernie's point there at all.
So there is definitely a big difference between manufacturing sector and energy and sector services providers. For manufacturing, as Bernie mentioned, there is inefficient equipment, but it also depends on the sector that they're from. CNC machining might have lower energy use, whereas forging and casting have extremely high energy use. They're actually the main energy consumption across the Black Country. That's why the Repowering the Black Country program has been instituted there. So it is looking at retrofitting, but also making new equipment available, so innovative technological solutions to try to address these processes, operations that are extremely energy intensive, which are different from a service provider, where they might benefit from having sustainability or low carbon around the building, offices, quite different spaces. So one is more process and machine oriented, and the other one is more generic that can be applied to a number of different businesses.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lorelei, and some good perspectives there. And there have been some questions relating to the IT industry, and I don't know if there's any broad advice we could give Andrew here on. He says, what recommendations would you have relating to IT and reducing your carbon footprint? I don't know if anyone would like to come in on that at all.
Yeah, I can come in on that one, Will. So worked in the IT industry a little bit myself before I worked for the council. We don't really get involved, or to my knowledge, we haven't really got involved in funding any IT replacement equipment. What we would recommend is obviously keeping your equipment as new as possible and as efficient as possible. One of the main ways from experience that you'll be able to reduce your spend on site on IT is look to migrating your core services to the cloud. So rather than having a rack of servers as tall as your ceiling and all the cooling that comes with that, chuck all that stuff into the cloud, outsource it somewhere. You're going to reduce your carbon footprint from that. But if you need to keep services on site for resiliency purposes or something like that, consider solar PV. Solar PV on your roof would help support a lot of the power needed by those services on site in terms of your core IT bits and bobs. So that's the long and short of it, really, as far as I can outline.
Thanks, John. It's certainly a bit of a different issue, as Lorelei, I guess, alluded to, in terms of in between sectors, they do have different issues as well, depending on what they're getting involved in from a service and product point of view. So I'd just like to ask as well. I mean, this may be a question more for David and Lorelei, just because you're at the forefront of innovation in the region and more nationally as well. I guess what do you see I guess the most promising technologies that you're coming across at the moment for energy reduction and carbon reductions?
And I'll start off on that one. I think if you take the broader picture, that actually peak heat demand is 3 times peak electricity demand in the country. The question then becomes one of, how do we actually produce potentially enough electricity to decarbonise heat, and what are the other mechanisms we can use to actually take heat from one process that might be wasted and utilised in another process? A slightly different perspective to that even is, if you look on a global basis, cooling demand will outstrip heating demand around the world by 2040 due to climate change and some extremes in parts of the world that will become unsurvivable. So the opportunities for innovation lie in both heating and cooling. And certainly one of the things that we're working on significantly at the moment are these new materials for storing heat efficiently and effectively. So Lorelei mentioned these phase change materials, which can actually store heat and cooling from -10 degrees, -20 degrees, all the way up to 1,000 degrees C, and using wrong time energy production. So you imagine we stop utilizing the power from wind turbines and we pay people to stop producing. We can actually capture that and store it in these large thermal batteries. And these thermal batteries, for example, can also be used in the automotive sector. So the range of an electric vehicle is the scale of the battery. If you disconnect the battery for power for the powertrain system from the heating system, you significantly increase the range. And there are all sorts of other demands where again, looking globally, the cold chains around the planet, the amount of energy that is potentially wasted. We package LNG in countries halfway around the world, and we do it in cold. Basically, compress it, make it cold. When we bring it to our country, that cold is discarded, and potentially then the gas goes through our gas grid to generate power to run our air conditioning systems. The irony is we lose enough cooling through that process to provide all the cooling needs of our country every year. So we have to start thinking on a whole systems level. So the innovations aren't necessarily specific, it's the whole systems, almost industrial symbiosis opportunities as well. So we're thinking on that sort of scale as well as on the micro scale.
Lorelei, I don't know if you'd like to come in there, but clearly, again, we're coming back full circle to the circular economy and that whole systems approach once again. So yeah, next week is obviously going to be quite a topical conversation around how businesses can get involved in that in a bit more detail. So yeah, Laura, I don't know if you'd like to come in.
David mentioned already thermal energy technology adoption. So this waste heat recovery, waste cooling, energy recovery, those are the big topics. But the same processes, so thermal energy storage, can also be applied, for example, for the housing market. So in housing heating, I know of our academic colleagues who have applied for funding and have gained it to develop more efficient heating systems for normal flats, apartments, houses. So that would also tackle another big part of the carbon emission sector around housing, which is another big problem we have around the world, not just in the UK. And also in terms of clean energy, hydrogen, will be extremely topical for a number of different sectors. So we have the hydrogen factory at Tyson Energy Park. Tom has spoken about a little bit about different applications for the aviation industry, but it will be available basically. To get back to one of the questions, it should be possible at some point to become to have a micro factory for hydrogen, producing hydrogen for your own use in the future. And it is a green gas. It is a carbon negative gas. So it's definitely the future. And in our experience, we have already seen a number of equipment manufacturers, equipment that uses natural gas, that are looking at increasing the hydrogen percentage that they can use in their fuel blend. So it's definitely something that private companies are looking at developing and implementing.
Great, certainly some very informative perspectives there, and thank you, David and Lorelei, for sharing. And so I just wanted to take out of, I guess, the more technical side of things and innovation, and just bring it back to I guess, wider business management. So I'm going to go around the panel here. So I hope you're all ready, and kind of we can go around and if there are, if the business is listening, what are, I guess, the top 3 things that you would say to them today? And I'm sure there'll be some agreement and crossover here, but the top 3 things that you can say to them today for them to, I guess, start on the process, or start progressing, their energy reductions and reductions in emissions to achieve net zero. So I'm gonna pick on whoever's to the left of me at the top, and we've got David smiling here, just like he knows it's him. So David, I'll go over to you first, and then I'll work down the list.
I think it comes down to for me, what Jonathan and Bernadette were talking about earlier on. Really understand that base audit of your business, where you're using energy and when you're using energy, and look for those opportunities where you think you're using power that you shouldn't be using. That sort of low-lying fruit. Almost, it's a baseline audit in which you can then grow future ambitions, which may include innovations in the future, but there's some really low-hanging fruit to deal with in the first instance.
Thank you, Dave.
Bernadette.
Thank you, David, and I'm going to come to John now. You're next on the list, so I can see all of the panelists sweating, thinking, are they next? But John, it's you. So what would your top 3 pieces of advice be?
Well, I think for us, from a business perspective, we know that energy costs are going to go up. We know that climate change is, unless you listen to the wrong websites, is real, and it's going to get worse in terms of the temperature increase. So take the bull by the horns. Take the advice that's there. There's funding available. There's advice available. So take the bull by the horns and grasp it. And move forward, become more green, take the funding available, and try and revolutionise the way your business works, or you'll get left behind, in my opinion.
Thanks, John, and it's very interesting, isn't it? And Tom, I'll come to you next. It's kind of, you've got to take that time out now to invest in your future, and then the benefits will come in the future. So it's kind of taking that time out, isn't it? So Tom, what would your your bits of advice be for businesses looking to reduce their energy today?
I think firstly, it goes back to metering point for me. Just understand your data, understand where you're using that energy, and then look to reduce your energy in those areas. Firstly, don't try and meet all your energy demand through renewable energy. Reduce what you're using first down to the absolute minimum, and then do the rest through hopefully through renewables. I'd say also take a holistic view. So I use the LED lighting as a small example at Birmingham. Think about the bigger picture. Don't just do little bits. How does that interact with the bigger site? And whilst it's always very tempting just to rush off and start doing stuff, which is important, we need to be starting the journey. What you might find is 4 or 5 months to really step back, to a bit of a bigger look at it, probably pays off quite a lot in the long run. And I'd say finally, and something we've kind of always said from the start, is just don't be scared to not know. Parts of it, the answers aren't there, particularly as I've said, the gas around us. But unless we commit to this and challenge ourselves and are ambitious, it won't drive the innovation that people on this call are working on now to meet those future needs.
Thanks, Tom. And Lorelei, I've got you next, and then we'll come to Bernie finally. So sorry about that, Bernie. You may be repeating a lot of what's said, but no harm in reiterating points, I guess. So Lorelei, over to you.
Yes, so I believe the answer you mentioned that what would be the top 3 things. So I think it's going to be the 3 same ideas for everyone. So it is your energy audit, understanding where your energy consumption comes from, how much of it is carbon, for example, from a manufacturing process, and looking at minimizing what you can within the company, but also do you need to make some bigger changes, like revolutionize your process? So looking for available opportunities, which could be funding, local SME support programs, academic support. So what are your options available in a certain area? So this is something that I think it's quite a pathway for companies to take. Energy audit, look at how much you can save, and are there any small picture as well as large picture technologies you can adopt.
Thanks, Lorelei. And Bernie, I guess would you like to add anything that hasn't been said to that? I know David kind of stole what you were saying a bit, but obviously has some great perspectives to add as well. So yeah, would you like to come in on that?
I can do, yeah, just sort of 3 really basic brass tacks things. Mentioned about looking at your current energy usage, but really digging into your bills in more detail, like we referred to in our presentation. I've worked for businesses in the past that are completely unaware of their tariff, completely unaware of their energy use, don't look at the bills, they just pay it. And it is important to be aware of that. We've mentioned LED lighting a lot, but that is a relatively low cost measure, big carbon saving. Of all the measures you could look at, that's probably the first one. If you only focused on that, that would help. And adding timers or controls to equipment to make sure things turn off, or if they're already in place, make sure they're set correctly, so when the clocks go back and things like that, you can make savings, simple savings. So that's my 3 basic ones to add.
Excellent, thank you. And so that's it. It comes to an end, folks. And I just want to say thank you all for attending today. It's certainly been very insightful, and we've had a lot of practical tips that hopefully you can start applying to your business today, if not this week. And I'd like to thank also our panelists today who have taken their precious time out to really help us as a business community on our journey to net zero. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Aston University, Arup, University of Birmingham, and Morgan Sindall. As without their support, this webinar series would simply not be possible. Thank you all for your time today. I'm Will Hargreaves, Policy Advisor at the Greater Birmingham and Coventry and Warwickshire Chambers of Commerce, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.